the media tends to dehumanize Palestinians in their reporting of the conflict. Can you tell us what your view is of how the UK media are approaching this war, and what's the difference in their stance towards Palestinians and towards Israelis?
Some of the language that's been used, when Palestinians are murdered, it's that they merely die or their lives are lost. I mean, Ahmed, who was supposed to be here today, when he was on, I think it's Good Morning Britain, at the bottom of the screen it said, Ahmed, who lost 41 members of his family. Now that makes it seem like it was, a natural disaster or something that made them die, and that's obviously not the case. And then when you compare some of the language, when it's the Israeli deaths, you see, particularly on October the 7th and onwards, you see the use of, the barbarism or the terrorism, or there is a clear difference in the language that is used, and that creates in people's minds, that one is acceptable or one is not, and contributes to this narrative and this dehumanization of Palestinians. I think we saw it with the prisoners as well, when I think it was the Guardian who later corrected it, when they described the Israeli prisoners as women and children before then, and then in this next sentence said the Palestinian prisoners being released were women and people aged 18 and younger. So this constant, downplaying the Palestinian trauma, downplaying Palestinian pain, and creating this difference that some lives are worth mourning more than others, some lives are more important than others. And one important point, particularly when it comes to media, is the fact that it's not just what they say, it's also what they don't say. So when you have numerous Israeli officials on TV who make claims like, there is no humanitarian catastrophe, as Zipi Hotovelli said to Sky News Cape early on in the genocide, or that when they're saying, we're being very precise, we're making sure that we're protecting civilians, these claims always go unchallenged. Now that in and of itself legitimizes and enables Israel's massacres, because by not pushing back, it gives the impression that it's true. And then we see the stark comparison when it's Palestinians or Palestinian representatives who are on TV, and they get, they're relentlessly questioned, scrutinized in a way that the Israeli officials and Israeli supporters are not. So it's constantly this dehumanization of Palestinians, and effectively sending this message that the murder of Palestinians is fair game. And the obvious one is the condemnations. I mean, at the beginning, every Palestinian who was interviewed was asked immediately, do you condemn terrorism, etc. We've seen state-sanctioned terrorism for 61 days now, 62 days, if not longer, and no Israeli supporter, official, spokesperson, nobody has been asked to condemn that terrorism. And that, again, it creates this narrative that some lives are worth mourning more than others.
As a British Palestinian, how would you describe what is currently happening in Gaza now?
It's devastating. It's horrific, and it's there's even to say those words is a tremendous understatement. I mean, I spoke to journalist Jamila Tawfiq recently, who's a journalist in Gaza, and she said when she described the state of affairs, I mean, she talked about people being practically like zombies, saying everybody's grappling with this despair, this agony, this trauma, and effectively trying to survive, knowing full well that's unlikely. And I thought to myself instantly, how does even one wrestle with that mentally? How people with children, and when you see the scenes, they are horrific, they are catastrophic. You're seeing entire communities flattened, schools have been flattened, people are being displaced, forcibly evacuated. And these are the instructions of the Israeli military, and they're still being bombed. People are, in shelters, UN shelters, still being bombed. And a thing that I think needs to be emphasized is that this is all intentional. This isn't an instance of Israel's, uncharacteristically, hard-handed approach. This is exactly what they said they would do. They said their focus would be on destruction, not accuracy. They said that civilians in Gaza are not innocent. Hamas and people in Gaza are all as one. They said it will be reduced to a city of tents, and that is exactly how it's played out. When you look at the catastrophe that is playing out in Gaza, it is exactly as the Israeli officials, the Israeli military, the Israeli political class, that is exactly how they envisaged it. It's exactly what they wanted to achieve.
Israel has now killed 13 times the number of people that were killed by Hamas on 7th of October. I mean, we don't know the exact number of people killed on the 7th of October, and also we don't know the exact number of Palestinians who have died, because this official figure put out by the Gaza ministry is almost certainly an underestimate, given there's a lot of missing people. So we don't know the true numbers, but the numbers are incredibly high and shocking, and we all see the pictures, and they are truly shocking. Ahmed Al-Nouk, who we were going to have on tonight, could have spoken about 23 members of his family who have been killed in the Israeli bombing. Absolutely unimaginable. What should people do to try and halt, to do what they can from here, from the UK, to try and halt the level of violence being perpetrated by Israel against Palestinians?
The issue of MPs is an interesting one. And I know there have already been campaigns on the ground. I've spoken to a few people, in particular in West Streeting's constituency, who are seemingly very committed to unseating him. Now, the logic is that, what is the thing that MPs crave the most? It's their position, it's their salary. And if West Streeting, for example, has ambitions to go on to be the health secretary in a future Labour government, which looks obviously increasingly likely, then how best to send a message rather than make him the health secretary, make him toast? And people on the ground speak to me and say that imagine how powerful it would be if whenever the election is, that it emerges that West Streeting has been unseated, has lost his seat, and the main message is that because of how he voted and his position as a prominent member of the Labour Party when the war in Gaza was raging on. So I think there is that logic on the ground. We're seeing a lot of action in terms of at the grassroots level. Today we saw, I think the Elbit systems, a few of the factories were cornered in, were basically blockaded by protesters. So it sends a message and continues to apply this pressure at a grassroots level. We've seen, obviously, there's another protest coming up on Saturday. There's multiple sit-ins all the time. There are also students walking out now out of schools to illustrate the strength of the message and the opposition to the stance that our politicians have taken. So I think a lot of people do say, well, what is the impact? I think it's important to continue with the momentum and to continue applying that pressure, because it does show that the politicians are increasingly against what the public mood is, and all the polls reflect that as well. I think there was a poll not long ago that suggested even a substantial number of Conservative voters were in favour of a ceasefire. So I think that can only last so long. I think eventually, especially when it comes to people's personal interests pertaining to MPs, it would be in their interest to actually listen and take note. But I think for a lot of people that suggests there is not much, or the impact is little, I think, to continue, because it might not be something tangible that you can see directly, because obviously the war is still raging on and the genocide is raging on. But it's something that is shaping public opinion. It's awakening a lot of people. It's changing a lot of perceptions, and that in and of itself is powerful as well.